News 12 presents This Old Town with Allen Oren.
Welcome to This Old Town. We will be traveling back through Long Island history with some encore presentations of This Old Town segments. And this time, we mean business. Long Island has been home to a variety of businesses and industries, each developed in response to a special resource. Among the more unique ventures was the earliest radio station, the largest law encyclopedia, farming where it had always been fallow, and duck distribution via Peking. But one of the island's special businesses was the way the rest of the businesses got around. The Long Island Railroad was the country's first commuter rail line, though it was not planned that way. Its twisted and sometimes troubled history is part of the history of Babylon.
Babylon. How does a town get a name like Babylon? Well, Nathaniel Conklin, who lived in this house, was one of the first to move there from the North Shore. "You're moving down there," his mother cried, "with the saloons and guns? You're moving to that Babylon?" And things have been moving since in this old town. Movement, transportation, has been central to Babylon. First rail transportation and the rescue of the Long Island Railroad. The railroad, you see, was never meant to serve Long Island, but to be the fastest route to Boston as announced in this ad. The train would run from Brooklyn to the island's tip, and a ferry would run to Connecticut, and another train. But when that failed, Austin Corbin of Babylon took over as president. A Harvard law graduate, he reordered the railway to serve Long Island, and as quick as a clickety-clack, he had the company turning a profit. He did get some oddball competition, though, from a nearby cousin who envisioned a monorail and actually built a model which worked but never sold. Corbin's vision was for Montauk to replace New York Harbor, and his dream, ended by his accidental death, was for his beloved trains to whisk us there. A different kind of horsepower entranced August Belmont, whose 1,000-acre Babylon estate was a thoroughbred horse farm. The family helped found hunt clubs and polo clubs and, of course, racetracks, one bearing their name and image. The estate is now a state park, and what remains is the pine trees that flank the entrance on the median, and a dog who once led a very favored life. Oh, and that run every June past a sign saying Belmont Park. Babylon people remember the history, but oh, that sinful name.
Well, they're not too happy about that part.
Why?
Well, they don't want it to be known as a sinful place because it's not. It's a wonderful place to live.
And there are tales of farmers who didn't like the railroad scaring their cattle. One actually soaped the rails and stopped the trains. But another industry, well, it was welcomed more wholeheartedly. Radio was not only developed on Long Island, but by 3 different developers. Eastern Long Island was perfect for broadcasting. It was clear, it was quiet, and it was often elevated. In particular, one point, Rocky Point.
Nature created the name Rocky Point. The points overlooking the Sound are filled with rocks. But science created the history in Rocky Point, major scientific achievements. Like those Rocky Points, though, the achievements have often eroded with time in this old town. When the rocks were this size in Rocky Point, at the start of the century, this man created radio, the wizard of the magic box. Marconi, at left, set up one of his first U.S. stations on the island. He broadcast experimentally in dots and dashes from a shack at right that originated on a Babylon farm, but now rests in Rocky Point, though rather shakily. It's bandaged and bruised. Its messages now much harsher ones. Only on Marconi's birthday, April 25th, does a town group broadcast here, creating a small spark of what once was. Not far from that shack, this is what once was. It was the creation of Nikola Tesla, the renowned eccentric inventor of AC current, who even theorized that the world could be split by mechanical resistance. His dream, though, actually built, was a world wireless tower at Rocky Point. When he ran out of money, the generator stopped, and the huge wooden structure, never operational, was blown up during World War I as too good a German target. Now the building's vacant, surrounded by barbed wire, not wireless history. And even the street sign, meant to honor Tesla, misspells his name.
It's hard to misspell the name RCA, which soon after did what Tesla didn't, made Rocky Point the hub of global broadcasting. Attracted by Rocky Point's clear signal, RCA put up 400-foot antennas, the highest spots on Long Island in the 40s. It created Radio Central, the world's largest transmitting station. That plant closed when satellites arrived, but its legacy is kept by a few who work there. Bob McGraw and 25 others keep in touch through ham radios at home, communicating just as they did then in Morse code. Oh, and one more bit of high-tech in the area, a nuclear power plant that's also been abandoned. What would the pioneering scientists think of it?
Well, I imagine they'd be very surprised. They probably wouldn't realize that what their original inventions had led to. But that's progress. It's all based on their work.
Now, the Marconi Shack is now being saved. The dots and dashes that were once heard on the inside will hopefully be removed from the outside. Before we leave the mass media, though, another unique business, this one connected to publishing. It brought the law to Northport, and it brought the ladies. Northport is a town filled with history. You can tell from its old storefronts, but most uniquely from its old odd names. They trace its journey as surely as old trolley tracks in this old town. First, there was Bread and Cheese Hollow Road, where Bull Smith, founder of Smithtown, stopped to eat bread and cheese on his one-day bull ride around the region. Then, when New York was a British colony, there was Fort Salonga, misnamed for the fort builder, George Slongo, a bastion of the British. The fort was the site of a key colonial raid during the Revolution. Behind this home on Brookfield Road, the fort once stood. Colonial raiders crept quietly toward it, after crossing by whaleboat from Connecticut, then burst inside, killing 4 soldiers, taking 21 prisoners, and destroying the fort. For decades after, the area was known by the odd name Cow Harbor, because cows grazed by the harbor. But by the mid-1800s, shipbuilders grazed there too. Led by Jesse Carll, the town turned out more than 200 wood vessels. By the end of the century, it had its current name and a new business that flourished in this building. The town was transformed when an oysterman named Edward Thompson decided to publish the first law encyclopedia. He brought in lawyers, mainly from the South. They brought in new culture, like the play Patience, and when the new men formed social clubs, women, it was said, came to Northport from all over the island to see the parade of eligible bachelors and to do some parading themselves. A Southern connection exists to this day, as fathers like this one married 4 daughters to lawyers. Oh, and the firm attracted other business, like the new power company next door, which later spread across the island, LILCO. Finally, in this century, another unusual name. The pit was created by the sand digging business. A huge pit was dug, then gave its name to this neighborhood when Northport Cliffs contributed the sand for the sidewalks of New York. Now, how is that for a trio of businesses? Law books, LILCO, and quarrying. But quarrying wasn't the only Earth-related business on Long Island. 2 of the biggest were only on slightly different ground. We will explore that ground when we return after these messages. Stay with us, please. Welcome back to This Old Town. This time we're very business-minded. We are looking at the more unique commerce and industry in Long Island history. Many such ventures were rooted in the land. Farmland, after all, blanketed the island until fairly recently. For example, 50 years ago, potato fields stood where Levittown now does. One of the more interesting farming stories comes from a town with a very appropriate name. It's situated in a dale fine for farming, Farmingdale. You wouldn't know it looking at the train these days, but the coming of the railroad turned Farmingdale into Farmingdale, or at least turned the name of this old town. The town was originally named Hardscrabble because its tough soil made it tough to farm there, and a few current spots remember that ironic name. The early town was founded by Thomas Powell, and for 100 years, only Powells lived there, establishing a Quaker meeting house to worship freely. These days, in a big yellow Victorian, only one Powell descendant remains, living right across from the founder's still-standing home. She remembers him for his integrity.
When you look back in the history, he was called upon to settle surveying disputes. He was sent out to settle things with the Indians because the Indians respected his word. So I think he sort of set a standard, really.
But his small town changed with the railroad, which at first made it one of only 2 stops all the way from Brooklyn to Greenport. The other was Punk's Hole, now Manorville. A land developer, envisioning boom times, thought Farmingdale sounded better than Hardscrabble, and the name remained, along with the old station. Fortunately, the town lived up to its name, with farms specializing in cucumber, cauliflower, and especially pickles, led by the Stern Pickle Works. Farmingdale was even chosen for a state agricultural college, where curricular activities included students spraying the orchards, and extracurricular ones were held at a log cabin social hall. The yearbook, of course, was supported by hay and grain ads. But this may have been the most productive piece of land. It sprouted into what is now Republic Airfield. Fairchild first built planes there in the 1920s, including the first aircraft to be used in Antarctica, buried in the snow, then reused. But Republic made the biggest noise. It created Thunder. First, the P-57 Thunderbolt that skirmished in record numbers during World War II and shot down 1,000 Nazi planes. Then the Thunder Jet, the prime fighter bomber for the Korean War, and the Thunder Chief, which ran the most bombing runs in Vietnam. Finally, the A-10, which created thunder during Desert Storm. And finally, a very unique kind of farming, poultry farming, and a unique kind of poultry farming, ducks, and a unique kind of ducks from Peking. Soon enough, they became known as Long Island ducks, and soon enough, they became part of Moriches history. In Moriches, old buildings line new streets. The past has often survived to the present in this old town. The town names are from the past, for example. It was just Moriches till the railroad came. Then, with split rails, came the split name, Center Moriches and East Moriches. Also from the past, though in dwindling numbers, is the area's most distinctive industry. Peking ducks, brought from China, became the famed Long Island ducks. And when meat was rationed during World War II, Long Island restaurants sometimes had one item on the menu, duck. Pollution became a problem, though, and soon the industry, like the duck at Wright, was wobbling badly. Now, just 2 farms remain on the island in Moriches. The most famous old building is the Ketchum Inn, first a stagecoach stop where Jefferson stayed to do some writing and Hamilton stayed to do some courting, and which later became the town's social center. You could meet the dentist, for example, and now has won preservation status. The most famous old residence was Lindemere. It was known for its linden trees, which still line its front drive, but little known was its most famous owner, Imelda Marcos. She visited the house regularly, though recently it was put up for sale. Not many in the town ever saw her, though often you knew she was there.
Oh, I only had one occasion to see a convoy going down Union Avenue with soldiers with guns, and I couldn't imagine what was going on, and I later found out that it was Imelda with her entourage going to the Lindemere.
The most interesting rooms from the past were at the far right of the Masury estate. John Masury caused a stir in the paint business by inventing the lip cover for paint cans, and his wife spent much of the profits on their Moriches home. There was a bowling room, which remains minus the alleys, but with the ball and pins in a closet. And most enchanting is the nearby ballroom with bar just outside. It's 2 stories high with eyebrow windows and wide window seats, and a balcony for promenading and performance. Look up at the frescoed ceiling and feel the swirl of dancers filling the floor at 4 yearly balls. Or just see the actual dancers at an annual Victorian ball in this truly grand ballroom. That ballroom is one of the most charming that I've seen in old Long Island. But back to business, Long Island business. We've seen some of its history, and that raises some questions. So we'll move to the other side of the ledger and answer those questions with the help of Ed Smits, Nassau County Historian. He will be with us when we return. Welcome back to This Old Town. We've been looking at Long Island business and industry, or at least some interesting examples in its history. Here to analyze those examples and offer us some others is Ed Smits. He is the Nassau County Historian. Thanks for joining us, Ed.
Good to be here, Howard.
We had talked in the beginning of the pieces about the Long Island Railroad. One history book I read actually said it was probably the most twisted, troubled early history in American transportation. I say early history as opposed to current history, not to offend. Why was it that troubled and that difficult?
Well, the railroad started out on a great premise that they were going to provide the through route to Boston. And they extended the line out to go out to the North Fork and then go by ferry in the 1800s, since there was no rail line along the Connecticut shore. And it worked out fine for about 10 or 15 years. But then suddenly a railroad came on the Connecticut shore, and that was the end of the through traffic to Boston.
And I remember the executive early on absolutely promising that there was no way you could get through Connecticut with all its hills and mountains. Sure enough, a few years later.
Right. Well, that was an example of technology, and we've been fighting technology and the technological change, of course, every 20 or 30 years in the United States. It's been so tremendous. And the railroad then tried to develop a business with farm production, moving that, and even spent a lot of time trying to promote Long Island farming, and was quite successful in that area, but there still wasn't enough business from it to really generate through traffic. So it wasn't really until the early 1900s when electrification began, and in 1910, the railroad went all the way through to Manhattan and to Penn Station. Prior to that time, you had to take a ferry from Brooklyn to Manhattan. So, because that changed the whole atmosphere then.
When it hit Penn Station.
Right. Then we really began the commuter business on Long Island. And we got really the first development of suburbia in 1910 to 1930s.
Let's move to a less troubled business. So less troubled that there were actually three major developers on Long Island, and that's the radio industry. Why did they flock to Long Island, to Rocky Point, to the eastern side?
Well, Marconi established a station there because Marconi was one of the geniuses that developed the transmission that began radio, and he started in Europe sending ship signals, telegraphy to ships. And of course, so it was natural then that when he came to the United States, that's how they evolved then from Long Island. Again, our unique geography, Long Island being the furthest point and the landfall for ships coming in and out of New York Harbor. That was a logical place then to have the telegraphy station for shipping. And Marconi, though, had some of the very unusual patents, and although there were lots of other people involved in the development of the radio industry, he had some of the key ones, and the development then went from that station.
And I suppose the geography really was crucial. In addition to it being close to the sea lanes, it was just so clear and often very high.
That's true. And then Marconi's organization was taken over by RCA, and they were still dealing with technology then. That they were the producers of the signal. But then they realized, well, when radio came in the 1920s, they realized that the programming, like what we're doing, is really the vital part, and that's where the economic base is. And then NBC was formed. So we got three corporations out of
And they decided that Manhattan rather than Rocky Point was the place for programming.
Right.
A wise decision, I guess, ultimately. Yeah. Let's talk about the Marconi Shack, which I showed in the piece, and the Tesla Street, which was misnamed. Those kind of slights to important sites. How frequent is that on Long Island, that we don't take care of our historical heritage?
Well, probably more than a lot of us would like. I think in many areas people really don't realize what is right within the local community, and Long Island, as most of the United States since the 1960s, has a tremendous population turnover. So though we have a lot of long-time residents in many areas, they sort of don't even keep track of their own community, and it is unfortunate that we have a great number of historical societies and local historians that are concerned about this. Long Island has one of the largest groupings of local historical societies. We have almost 100 in Nassau and Suffolk County. So some communities do a very good job. Others haven't still discovered their heritage.
Let's move from the airwaves to airplanes. In the piece in Farmingdale, I talked about Republic as an important industry here. Obviously, there's also Grumman, and we shouldn't forget Grumman. Talk a little bit about that and the importance of Grumman aircraft.
I mean, the aircraft industry, of course, was really the new technology that changed the Long Island, American technology and Long Island in the 1920s as we began to develop an airspace industry to go along with all the experimentation that went on all the airfields. Fairchild building his field in the 1920s at Farmingdale and starting Farmingdale as a manufacturing section. And then in the 1930s, D. Seversky coming in and establishing Republic Aviation, and just not too far away in Bethpage, LIRR Grumman establishing Grumman. And of course, Grumman and Republic really became a major part of American aviation industry in World War II, producing Republic producing the Thunderbolt, the primary fighter plane, and Grumman producing the three major carrier deck aircraft. And fortunately, we'll have all of those for display in the future Cradle of Aviation Museum for Long Islanders that we're building at Mitchel Field.
Now, back on the ground, we had talked about farming, and probably from that early Medford experiment with Fullerton, where from nothing they were able to grow thousands of crops in a international experiment. From then, farming was crucial to Long Island. On the other hand, we have very few farms now. Why that evolution, and is it leading towards something else? Are the wineries, for example, a natural extension?
Yeah. It's again, I think, has been influenced by Long Island's technology, but by the fact that Long Island, we didn't have minerals and so forth, so we used the natural area. And farming always was a major part of the Long Island economy, right through the 1920s and 30s. Unfortunately, in the 30s, most of the farming had converted over to potatoes, became the major production, although market gardening and nursery business was still important. But then the golden nematode came in, and potato production was wiped out, basically, after World War II. Now, though, we've seen this unusual resurgence, even though suburbia has pretty well covered and taken up Nassau County property. In Suffolk County, we have wineries now developing on both the North Fork and the South Fork, and we're getting a whole new industry, so that Nassau and Suffolk still make up the major agricultural production in New York State. It's amazing.
Let me end on a lighter note. We talked about Farmingdale originally being called Hard Scrabble. Yeah. How often do you have those kinds of name changes? I know Hungry Harbor later became Tiger Town, which became Valley Stream, a little more tranquil. Yeah. How often does that happen? Do you sort of clean up the image with a new name?
It happened quite often in the late 1800s and early 1900s, sometimes by deliberate action of people, or other times just names have disappeared. Jerusalem, the old term for Wantor, and the North and South Levittown area disappeared in the suburban growth of the 1950s. But that is an interesting part of our heritage.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Ed. I'm sorry that's all the time we have at this point. We thank you very much for giving us another view of Long Island business history, for balancing our books. And we hope, of course, that you enjoyed minding our business, which was the business of Long Island, at least this time around. Join us again when we will look at facts and figures of another aspect of Long Island history. Till then, I'm Allen Oren.